topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, glad you could join us. I'm Bill Martinez. And, you've heard me often say that in the absence of fact or the truth, opinion rules. And some people are satisfied with what we've been told. Some of us have said it's more of a narrative than actual factual evidence. There's still so many questions surrounding 9/11 and the destruction of World Tower, North South, and Building 7, right? And when you have an absence of fact and truth that seems to be missing, it really accommodates what people would call a conspiracy, right? Well, we've got architects and engineers all around the world who 24 years down the road now, and ever since the report came out from the government with the official report. And again, anything that comes from the government, I don't mean to sound so cynical, but it's like we got to do our own homework. Can we really trust what the government is telling us? From the JFK assassination, just go down the list, weapons of mass destruction. It just seems that the one thing you can count on is the government, for all the money that we pay them, fails to get it right. Most of the time. COVID, add COVID to the mix as well. I know you think I sound cynical. I hear myself and I think, oh, gosh, I'm just losing it here. I'm just so anti-government. But I'm reality driven and truth driven because the truth is important. It is critical. When you have the lies out there, it affords for a platform. It's almost much like a computer software program. Once you allow the truth to, or a lie to permeate the operating system, then what does it do? It attracts more lies. And then you're in absolute chaos. So the same thing happens with the culture. When the truth is absent and lies are more prevalent, or even when you get the truth, you're trying to discern the truth through the filter of these lies. You know what I'm saying? It gets to be a bit confusing. Well, I had a chance to talk with Kamal Obeid here this past week, and Kamal is the chairman of the AE911Truth committee, or chair of this organization, and he's a civil and structural engineer. And we had a fascinating conversation. I said, Kamal, we got to get you back here because we need to have more time for you to lay out this story and tell us why we've got almost 4,000 architects and engineers. Of that, 2,700 military are calling for a new investigation into the destruction of all three World Trade Center skyscrapers that happened on 9/11, right? Well, I want to bring Kamal on with us right now so he can begin to tell us what we do know versus what we don't know and what we've been able to discern after 24 years and more research since this initial document that came out from the government, giving us a story that left a lot of questions back in 2008. Kamal Obeid, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us, sir.
Thank you, Bill. Good afternoon. Pleasure to be here.
Well, okay. What is it that we do know about the World Trade Center buildings?
Well, I could simply say that we do know that there's something very, very wrong with the official story. That's really the premise that when engineers look at how these buildings, all three of them, collapsed, there's questions that arise. And at the very beginning, when I saw these happen, it just seemed there's something absolutely wrong with that. And the worst part of it is then, of course, the government tasked the National Institute of Standards and Technology to do the investigation, NIST, and they put together these voluminous reports that discussed both the Twin Towers and Building 7 failures.
Mm-hmm.
And both were, once you review, you look at these documents and you go through them, you realize that they're flawed. They're and not only are they flawed, but they're negligent. They've missed so much evidence that they didn't look into. There's so much evidence out there that they completely ignored or deliberately ignored. Who knows what at that time what the mentality was, and so we have a very flawed document that leaves little to be desired. So and then of course, I mean the one of the bigger issues, of course, is the evidence. So when you have an airline disaster, for example,
right,
you piece together all the pieces of that plane to figure out exactly what happened. This is a major disaster. This is the crime of the century. Mm-hmm. And is it not important to actually go through and actually piece the buildings together, or at least piece portions of the building together to figure out why and how this thing happened?
Well, as a civil and structural engineer, you want to know, because if there's something flawed that you know somehow years of training in that and building have overlooked, and we've got new information, you should be aware of it. So going forward, this doesn't reproduce, right?
Absolutely. So you're worried about are our buildings unsafe to begin with? Can they collapse like that? Do the codes need to be changed? These are the questions that engineers must ask professionally.
Right.
And so
let me interrupt you again real quick, just as a foundation here. You've been doing this for over 30 years, right?
Absolutely.
So as a civil and structural engineer, how many buildings, multi-story buildings, have you observed or participated in the destruction of?
Zero, where I've seen actually buildings collapse like that.
Yes.
So I've analyzed structural steel frame buildings all my life.
I guess that's a better question, is how many buildings like that have you observed and studied in your career?
Quite a few. I mean, I must say, I've designed some buildings. I've done analysis on buildings, recommended retrofits of high-rise buildings. So I know what's involved. Obviously, this is my profession. I have to be very knowledgeable in that field.
Yeah.
And,
well, I just want our audience to understand that we're not talking with somebody, off the street somewhere who, works with Tinker Toys. I mean, this is your profession. You can see things instantly based on your experience, your training, and even, if I might say, your gut, right?
Well, we have to. It's you're trained to actually look at buildings a certain way, to understand how they work, to design them, to make sure they don't collapse like suddenly, spontaneously. So that's our job. That's our job. I mean, that's all our training is, really, as far as structural engineers go.
Right. Well, Kamal, I've been notified that our producer has our slides ready. So whenever you want to get into the slides to help explain what happened, because when we look at, I just say from a public standpoint, when we saw what happened on 9/11, the way those buildings came down, here in our world today, I mean, we've seen, I don't know, a dozen buildings in Las Vegas, for example, be demolished. And when they came down, these are multi-story hotel and casino operations. When they came down, my first thought was, is this Vegas? You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So, and of course, I mean, one of the most interesting cases here is really Building 7. And that's usually what we kick off conversations with the engineering community. Because that building, and I mean, we have a video of the collapse that, if you don't mind showing in a minute, but that building is a 47-story structural steel building designed to code at that time, with massive steel columns, with a system that actually is designed to resist hurricanes and a significant structural system, what's called a tube within a tube. In other words, it's got an outer skin that is all welded together and very, very strong, and it can bend and twist without falling apart.
Mhm.
And that building just came down on 9/11 at 5:20 in the afternoon without being hit by a plane down into its footprint at free fall speed. So that's really a baffling and interesting case to look at.
Mhm.
So if you'd like to show the and then we could talk about that.
Okay, this is the first slide of Building 7 coming down. Let's go ahead and watch this.
For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building
Kamal,
was
feel free
deliberately
to comment, even though we've
destroyed
got
by
some
well-placed
background
dynamite to
VO
knock
here.
it down.
Go ahead.
Okay. So it's interesting
Did
because
they actually use the word brought down, and who was
there's
telling you?
suspicion
The fire
of controlled
department.
demolition
The fire
right there, and
department.
there's also discussion of foreknowledge.
Mhm.
So you see how that building's coming down at as if there's nothing there underneath it.
And the only way you could actually do that, Kamal, if I understand, of course, I'm a neophyte here. You've forgotten more than I'll ever learn, but is that this would be representative of a planned demolition, right?
Absolutely. And the official story is that furniture fires, as a result of debris that penetrated into the skin of this building,
Mhm.
started these furniture fires that eventually heated the steel so much that it actually caused a series of events that cascaded into a massive progressive collapse. That's the theory. And the next slide that I wanted to show you is that
Okay.
right before the collapse of that building, the fires had burned out. So that's a slide that shows you that's where the fires were. The fires were gone. There's still some fires on the level below, but the level where the collapse initiated, there was no fires. And so that's the 13th floor. And so the official story is that that those series of events, which are, I don't know if we should go into because the beams and columns and stuff like that, it's just kind of a little bit too mundane. But these events are, to begin with, they're very unlikely to happen as a result of the heating of the steel, and considering especially that the fires have burned out.
Right.
So what we
But
did,
even assuming, Kamal, even assuming that the fires brought this down, the temperatures that it would have to be in order to melt the steel versus the temperature, the highest temperature, optimum temperature that you could possibly get with burning furniture.
Yes, I mean, so burning furniture, you could probably get up to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. To melt steel, you need to be over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's not, it is, even NIST agrees that this is not a possibility there.
Right.
So anyway, they conducted their study based on, they did this very elaborate study that they looked at how could this building collapse, and they did all these initiating events and all these theories, a beautiful theory. And all this, by the way, is without the benefit of having any debris or structural elements to investigate. Mm-hmm. So this is a completely computer model. So they looked at all these things happening on the inside of the building that caused this massive progressive collapse. And so the next slide is actually the model that NIST came up with that shows that even so, where you have all these things happening on the inside of the building is beginning to collapse. And this is what they came up with. See, the official, I mean, the actual footage is on the left, and the NIST model is on the right.
That's the computer. That's the computer model, right?
That's a computer model. Okay, so
right.
They have all these things collapsing on the inside of the building, and it's a little hard to see maybe on here, but you see all these things collapsing on the inside. But what happens? So when I mentioned that you've got the exterior skin of the building that's so ductile, it can move around and twist and and bend without collapsing. So if you fail the inside of the building like they have attempted in the model, what you see is the building really crumpling like a beer can. So that's what happens. So if that theory, if they want to apply that theory, they actually disprove their own theory by just their model, which is, I think, significant. Now, what we had to do, we retained Professor Holsey out of University of Alaska to do a finite element study, which is the state-of-the-art study to figure out, looking at the NIST model, all these elements that within the building that they say happened, all these events that happened, duplicate those. What happens to the building? So what happened to the building with our model, with every single one of these events happening, is the building would lurch a little bit and stop, or the building would twist a little bit and stop. That's what happens applying the correct methodology. And then the next step was, how can we make this model fail exactly like the actual footage? And so that's what Professor Holsey did. What they had to do after all this testing, and they did multiple different models in different programs, and they came up with the same results. What you'd have to do is actually physically remove the entire set of columns along 8 stories height within the building in order for it to develop enough of a pile driver effect to crush the building and come down the way it did. And so the next slide shows the University of Alaska model and how it actually duplicates the actual footage.
Okay.
Years later, looking like a Three Stooges movie covered with plastic, I swear to God. What are you gonna put in there? Just a good shirt. Then we went back there. Whoa!
So that's what happens if you remove the entire site. So that's controlled demolition, essentially. You do the controlled demolition on the model. This is what you're going to get.
So somebody designed and put together a plan to take out the critical reinforcements of the building for it to pancake on itself, basically.
Absolutely. This is a
that's
state-of-the-art design.
Who did that? That's one of the questions.
That's the thing. We have no clue who did that. I mean, we can pontificate and postulate and come up with theories, but the investigation really is up to. That's why we're calling for an unbiased third-party investigation of the evidence to be a comprehensive investigation as well. And then after that, if it is in fact determined that it is controlled demolition, then who did that? That's the job of the FBI or the federal government or the actual investigative bodies, the criminal investigation bodies in our government to do. We can't do that ourselves. We're not equipped to do that.
Right. So when we talked before in Building 7, this was the big question before, was what happened? A plane didn't hit Building 7. What, according to this report, what brought Building 7 down?
According to the NIST report, and I will go through what their study shows, they talked about one column on the 13th floor, the connections at one column of the 13th floor that initiated the whole cascading series of events. And that's called column 79. And their theory is that the fires under the 13th floor heated the girder so much that shifted the girder off its seat, and that fell down and the columns buckled. And then it failed, started sucking the structure in, and then sucking it down. So that's what you saw in the model, actually. Everything getting sucked in and sucked down, and the building crumples. So that's their theory. Now, we went through, the University of Alaska study went through every one of those events and showed that it's impossible for that to occur. For example, instead of the girder shifting off its seat, what happens if you heat the floors to the point where you have expansion? What's going to happen is the walls are going to bulge out instead of the girder shifting in. So things like that. So every one of those snapshot of each one of those events turns out to be completely false and flawed.
I got to imagine with all these engineers, structural engineers that you deal with, Kamal, they're looking at this and just going, this is just, fake news. I mean, this deal's a bad report. This is shades and memories of the Warren Commission report.
It's a very touchy subject, and I've lost a lot of friends talking about this issue. It's a conversation killer at the party. You want to kill a conversation? Talk about 9/11 or talk about something serious like that.
Yeah.
And
why is it so controversial that it's like you're on hallowed ground here, that you have to accept the government narrative, like so much the government recently has said to us. You have to accept it. If not, you're a conspiratist or you're some evil person for not buying into something that doesn't make sense, especially with your background and all the engineering. I mean, you're talking almost 4,000 architects and engineers that are going, no, this doesn't make sense.
Absolutely, and it's psychological. I mean, I can't really explain the psychology so well, and there are psychologists actually who discuss these issues. It's like a security blanket. You want to feel safe. You don't want to talk about things that are so disturbing. Just imagine how the evil behind this. It's just so disturbing that maybe if you don't put it in your consciousness,
right,
you're going to not have to deal with it,
right?
Essentially. So I don't know the psychology behind it. And I can tell you that I've talked to many other engineers, and they all agree with you. But do they want to touch it? A lot of the prominent engineers that I've worked with in the past, I used to chair the business forum at the Structural Engineers Association, and I've met a lot of principal engineers of the top flight structural engineering firms, and I called a friend of mine who was very intelligent, very well versed in this kind of thing, and I said, please look at this thing and tell me what you think. And so he basically called me back, left me a message. He didn't even. He left me a message, said, "I agree with you, Kamal," and then click. That was it. I never heard back from him after that.
Wow.
So,
yeah, that's.
Then another question is, why do you want to be involved in that? That's another question.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't explain. And then, of course, I mean, a lot of these big firms have big contracts with FEMA and with the federal government, and it would be disastrous, I think,
put
for
that
the
at
business.
risk. Yep, exactly. Well, that's the way, sadly, that so much of our government works, is that they compel you to a narrative. And if you don't go along with that narrative, well, then you're not invited to the reindeer games. You don't come to the cocktail parties anymore, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's amazing how resistant even the top tier engineering associations have refused to. They publish the official story and they seem to want to agree with it, but they don't allow you to publish anything that refutes that. And we actually got into a lawsuit with the American Society of Civil Engineers, which is one of the premier engineering associations that talks about these things. They had published a paper. By Professor Bezant, who explained the collapse of the buildings, which is very flawed, of the towers. And we had our team essentially refute that theory and have a very detailed discussion about that. And it was they refused to publish it. Refused.
Yeah.
It was published in some other organization's website, but on these premier organizations, these important organizations. So what we had to do is we had to go in at the grassroots and talk to engineers, have luncheons, and talk to them. Talk to the grassroots, and everybody who we've talked to would agree with us.
Yes.
You'd have some disruptors every once in a while,
of course,
but when you talk to the engineers, they agree with you. They have no argument against that.
We're back to it's almost like we're in that that sequence of the movie, A Few Good Men, you can't handle the truth. Like you said, the truth would seem so diabolical that our own government was involved in something like this. Some indicators are that they are involved. The old saying, you follow the money, which is a whole nother deal altogether, because what you're bringing to bear here in the discussion is here's the engineering structural integrity of a building. This is how it's supposed to work. We've got probably combined, hundreds of thousands of years worth of engineering and architectural experience bearing on this, saying this story is a narrative. It's not a proper executed document, that would be that would be respectful of your profession.
Absolutely. And I wouldn't say it's a tragedy, but the codes have been rewritten to address what's called progressive class, but they're based on false pretenses, but they've been made better. So maybe there's a little silver lining there, but it's not an honest silver lining. But the codes have been improved since then, regardless.
Right. Well, we talked about 7. Is there anything else that you want to address about Building 7 before we talk about the North and South Towers?
Well, it's just no. I think we've covered it enough today. But I think, to me, the most disturbing part of it is that the evidence of the crime scene was completely removed, and that by itself should tell us that there's something wrong there.
Right. And then here we are in going to the North and South Tower. We're seeing things with our eyes, and there's been studies by psychologists you mentioned and others that say, people will see certain things, eyewitness it, but, your eyes can only tell you so much until you really understand behind it, because a lot of people thought initially that the jet fuel itself was enough. And this was being reported by the media, that the jet fuel was hot enough to melt the steel beams that brought, those 2 towers down, for example, right?
Absolutely. That's the official story. Now, jet fuel does not burn. It burns very quickly. And what the fires that you would see, that you saw, that kept burning, producing all that smoke, were furniture fires. And those went on for hours before the buildings collapsed. And
you're saying maybe 1,000 degrees if you get it to optimum, but you need at least 3,000 in order to melt steel.
Yeah, absolutely. In order to melt the steel.
Okay.
So here you've got these 2 massive 110-story towers built to the latest codes at the time, very modern buildings. And those buildings are designed to sustain hurricane force winds. And we talk about hurricane force winds, it seems like we're talking about wind blowing and that kind of thing. But when you apply 100 pounds per square foot, hurricane force winds, like 200 miles per hour wind, generates at a building this tall an average of 100 pounds per square foot over the entire face of the building. That's a massive force on the building. So that's what they were designed for. And then, of course, they were designed, as the designers tell us, that they were designed for an actual jetliner piercing into the building and the building arching over that damage and basically keeps standing. So with all the redundancies that they built into it.
Right.
So then, what we see happen is that the planes actually did hit the building up on the upper stories, and that little section of the building at the top, just the official story is that the trusses sagged and caused the columns to buckle, and the top block just came down and crushed the entire building down. It crushed it down and then crushed up. So there was a crush down as if there's nothing there under the building. Absolute no resistance.
Right.
And then that little thing crushed up. So that's the theory. But the interesting thing about that is that the voluminous document that NIST put together essentially says that they went to the point. It's a 10,000 page or 30,000 page. I can't remember anyway. So it gets to the point where it says global collapse ensues, and then they refer to a paper written by Professor Bizant. And so I wanted to show the next slide before, which shows the destruction of the tower, and then I wanted to show the how the block dropped down on the rest of the building.
Okay, all right. So we'll go to the next slide now.
So you see here, you would notice that it's like a mushroom cloud almost. It's like these beams have been ejected out 600 feet. And then this huge cloud of pulverized material just spread all over Manhattan. Tonnage and tonnage of debris and dust, fine dust, and we'll talk about that in a minute, spread all over Manhattan, lower Manhattan. And that dust has a lot of evidence to tell us what happened there as well. But the next slide I want to show you before that is how the theory goes, is that little block at the top, which remains, basically was able to fall down on the lower part of the building and crush it at 60% free fall. In other words, as if there's almost nothing underneath, no resistance. Now, when you design a building like that, your structure has to be at least 3 times as strong as to hold up the level above. So the factors of safety are enormous, as well as what's called the ductility. So in other words, you have resilience where you drop where something twists and breaks, it doesn't quite crumble. It just kind of I mean, the crumbling part is really somewhat of a mystery here. Why did it crumble? And why
let's go back to that diagram. Here we go.
So that diagram is, you've got this is the north tower. You've got the upper section of the tower, essentially some damage to the where the plane is, and then you have the top portion, that little top portion, crushed down in diagram D, crushed down the massive building again at 60% free fall. And then when it got down to the bottom, it crushed itself up. That's a theory. So, I mean, it doesn't look like, when you look at the actual footage, it doesn't look anything like that, but it looks more like the building was exploded in a way. It looks like it was pulverized as opposed to collapse like this.
Well, so they want us to believe that small portion, which represents how many floors roughly does that? That's
this is the 91st floor that the plane hits, so 110. So we're looking at about 20 floors.
So that quadrant there is about 20 floors. So they want us to believe the weight of the 20 floors is enough to bring the rest of the building down. Is that what you're saying?
Perfectly in its footprint too. Not like it didn't. If the plane hit it on one side and the damage was on one side, that it would actually fall off.
Influence the fall. Yes, exactly.
Right. So it actually was able to just come down perfectly at its footprint. It's But
you're saying the engineering of those buildings was such that they're so reinforced, and you have so much redundant strength built into that building that those floors that came down shouldn't have been enough to bring the whole building down.
Absolutely, that's absolutely what I'm saying. Exactly. Even that would not make any sense. But so again, let's go back for a minute to the dust. Now, the dust was tested, and even FEMA did a test on the dust, and they found evidence of thermite. But they said it was a mystery that has not been solved. So not only was there evidence of thermite.
Explain to the audience thermite. If we can possibly go back and run that slide before, where we could see the dust coming down through the streets of Manhattan. And then, okay, so all this that we're seeing on top as the building's starting to disintegrate, now it comes down like the blob haze, and it just starts rushing in between the buildings and down the streets. And that's what we saw. That's what we saw people covered with all that powder and stuff, right?
Yes. There was nothing remaining of nothing. You couldn't, no piece of a computer, nothing. But interesting enough, evidently the passports of the hijackers were found on the debris, or were found on some other building as part of the debris. But anyway, that's a different story. But the point is that there was nothing. There was nothing recognizable in that dust, other than the steel elements that are all mangled and stuff in the.
But you said there was some military grade explosive that they were able to discover in this residue, right?
Yeah, there was signature of the sulfur and iron oxide materials, and what's more important is iron microspheres, which are perfectly spherical pieces of iron and steel that are indicative, and they're prevalent throughout the entire dust all over. Any sample that you take, you will see those. Wow. And those iron microspheres are indicative of molten steel. And steel cannot melt, as we talked about. It can't melt at those temperatures. The thermite, or the thermate, the military-grade thermate, is so reactive that it actually causes the melting of the steel. And firefighters and first responders have noticed molten steel running in the channels in the basements and it took months for this thing to cool down.
Wow.
And a lot of toxic material was just emanating. A lot of people got sick and died, and over time got cancer. It's just horrible. So all this evidence was completely swept away. I mean, it was not even talked about. And
they just ignored it.
They ignored it completely.
Wow.
All they looked at is, trusses basically sagged, and the connection failed. And they did a beautiful analysis on that. They showed all the heating of the steel and how this could happen and all that. But all that evidence, all the evidence of what the squibs of explosions before.
Exactly.
And so those were completely looked over. They were not even discussed at all.
We're talking with Kamal Obeid. He's a structural engineer with over 30 years of professional experience, currently serves as chair for the AE911Truth. He is contributing his engineering background to the organization's mission of advocating for a new investigation into the events of September 2011. And as he's breaking this down, I think you can understand, I mean, for everyday citizens, we look at this, and as much as we can comprehend, we're not engineers, we're not architects, but even at a layman's understanding, we go, whoa, this just seems rather suspicious, and seems a lot to be understood yet about this. And meanwhile, 24 years later, the 9/11 events that occurred with the Twin Towers and also Building 7, it again brought to us by the government. It brings us into the realm of the conspiratorial. But Kamal, thank you, to you and the thousands of other architects and engineers that have devoted their lives, have put their profession at risk. Like you said, I mean, you're not welcome to birthday parties even. That's what it comes down to. But that's the nature, is that sometimes the truth becomes an offense. It offends people before it becomes a defensive element, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's I mean, the good thing now is that this, after 24 years, this crime has been getting more attention now, and we have a sitting senator that is calling for in a position to actually initiate a new investigation, and we're just trying to support that every way we can. Mm-hmm. And we would urge your listeners and your viewers to come to our website, AE911Truth.org, where there's a wealth of material there for them to explore and see more and more detail what we're talking about here today.
Exactly. Like we often say here on this show, Kamal, is that don't just take our word for it. I mean, you're very experienced, you're knowledgeable, you know what you're talking about here. But we're saying, we have enough faith in the truth that we say, own your own knowledge. Don't just take our word from it. We're presenting it to you because we respect that you are a fellow human being with a brain. And we can get down to this. And, some people might say, Kamal, what, as another senator said, what does it matter anyway? We're so far down the road. What does it matter, right?
It matters so much. It matters so much, not only to the profession, but to our country, to the people who suffered as a result of this thing, to the wars that were initiated as a result of this. I mean, there's so much baggage that came out of this. So, and the aftermath, that we owe it. Every citizen, every patriot owes it to themselves to basically push for this new investigation and get down to the truth.
And what I said at the opening, Kamal, is that, look, the truth is so critical because lies beget lies. And this is what's happened over 24 years. You've had a lie come into this, and it just gets worse and worse as the years go on. And then what happens? It makes room for other lies, maybe non-related, but suddenly lying is acceptable. Well, our Constitution was built on the truth and morality. We are, in a sense, torpedoing the very structure and organization of our Constitution and this great American idea, are we not?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I want you to explain, you touched on this just a moment ago, and that is that first responders, other eyewitnesses there at ground zero witnessed themselves explosions. And NIST didn't want to hear that, did they?
There are 192, I believe, instances, recordings of first responders talking about explosions. And in fact, some of them have explosions happening while they were talking. And I think, and these are prevalent throughout the internet, but that's evidence that's been collected. And what we're trying to do currently is try to rebuild that evidence, because we're afraid that at some point it's going to disappear. So our mission right now, in addition to everything else that we're doing, is to actually reconstruct that evidence and put it in archives for everybody to have access to in the future.
Well, so they are eyewitness to explosion. You mentioned also the molten steel, and I thought this was fascinating in our last conversation, because I had wondered, I go, well, how did Building 7 go down? And I didn't understand. I didn't have the information at the time, and you shared it with me because you touched on this a moment ago, is that as the towers were coming down and the steel was melting, there was an explosion that caused the beams to go out, and like a Q-tip, so to speak. This is what I envision in my mind, kind of a Q-tip going out, but at that end, instead of cotton, is molten steel that went into the building. I mean, they were like missiles that went into the building. So now you've got 3,000 plus degree molten steel going into the Building 7 and in other areas, because they reported that these steel beams, what were they, jettisoned hundreds of yards away from the building itself?
600 yards, I believe. Yeah.
600. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Wow. But several of those beams that were moltenized had impacted Building 7, and that's what ignited the fire, right?
That's what ignited the fires, yes. But that still does not explain by any stretch how the building could have collapsed like that. Right. And of course, as we showed in the previous slide, that the fires had actually burned out at floor 13, where the initiation of collapse is alleged to have happened. That's right. So there,
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm just saying that yes, there was debris that actually penetrated into Building 7, but that by no means could that debris, and that was studied. Actually, even NIST agreed that in their report that the debris was not the cause of it was the cause of the fires, but it was not the cause of causing the building to collapse by any stretch. It was the heating. Yes.
The question is, the people of NIST that presented this document, Are they all still alive? Are they defending their report? Have certain things changed? I mean, we know so much more, but as we know in time, sometimes there could be somebody who chaired, passed away, we don't know, and eventually, the truth comes out. Is there any indication of that dynamic coming into play?
That's a very good question, Bill, and I wish I could answer it. I am not sure who's still there and who's not. But I know that the head investigator, Shams Sunder, is still around. I don't know if he still has the same position. And of course, they still hold on to the same story that they came up with. So,
well, we've got just a little over 4 minutes left here, Kamal. And you've touched on a lot of things here that I know is going to send our audience, rightfully so, to the internet, do their own investigating. Also going to your website, which is a great resource, because at your website, again, everybody, you need to understand, I mean, these are thousands, this is input from thousands of professionals, architects, engineers that are, laying out, it's not a theory. They're laying out structural evidence and argument for how and why these buildings went down, which is when you look at that and understand it, and then you read the narrative and you go, right away, there's conflict here, right?
Absolutely. And the thing is, I have to caution your viewers that now with AI,
oh yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of fabricated videos there that could mislead people as well, and mislead them, like to see like there was explosions coming out of building 7 that actually did not appear at that time. And so that's why it's imperative for us to reconstruct the actual evidence, the actual footage, and preserve it, so it doesn't get with the new technologies, it could get warped. And so we typically like to corroborate every piece of evidence to make sure that that's exactly what happened, that's what was said, so we try to make sure that it's not flawed, and preserve it that way.
Well, in order for the truth to come out, there needs to be a groundswell. It needs to be organic from the people. We, the people, this is the beauty of our Constitution. It really lays out the formula to how we can arrive to the truth when a government is deceiving you or other institutions are deceiving you. And first of all, you must understand, and hopefully this is what's been communicated to you, that the truth matters. It is most important with every issue of our government and our very lives. We must hold on to the truth as a precious element of our daily lives, or else we're going to be duped and we're going to be victimized like other empires and other cultures before us, right?
Absolutely.
Well, Kamal, go ahead and summarize everything, and then remind everybody where they can go for more information.
Okay. So clearly, when I invite your viewers and your listeners to come to our website and then also do their own investigation. Our website is AE911Truth.org. But do your own investigation as well. Do go through the internet, go through the archives, the files of many different organizations, have many different people have actually put together some beautiful footage as well. Some of it is correct, some of it is incorrect, but I leave that to your viewers to decide what is true, what is not. And so, I mean, clearly those buildings had quite a bit of help for them to come down the way they did. So what that tells us is there's something absolutely wrong with that story. And we need to come down, we need to get to the bottom of this. And thankfully, it's now getting traction after 24 years. And this, we would urge your listeners as well to call your congresspeople and get involved and ask for a new investigation. Put pressure on our Congress, because that's the only way we can get anything done.
Again, the truth matters, ladies and gentlemen. And if we're going to find out, it's going to be up to us. Kamal and the rest of the engineers and architects around the world, near 4,000, have put a lot on the line to protect the truth and for us to discover it for ourselves. But we must all come together. And as he said, contact your local, your legislatures, your federal congressmen, and make sure we put the pressure on them, because it's interesting right now. There's a lot of, this window of opportunity for the truth, Kamal. It just seems to be coming together. This is one of another story of events that are happened in our modern history over the last 50 to 70 years that are now coming up. It's bubbling up. And maybe it's for all the right reasons. Maybe that we may find ourselves rediscovering the truth and becoming the great America that we always thought we could be.
Absolutely.
Well, Kamal Obeid, I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you so much, Bill.
For your dedication, for what you've invested in the truth, and on behalf of the American people, that we would know really what happened on 9/11, and may we find that out, before another 24 years goes by, hopefully, right?
Thank you. Thank you.
Well,
Absolutely.
thank you, Kamal Obeid, a structural engineer, 30 years professional experience. He currently serves as the chairman of AE911Truth. AE911Truth.com is the website to go to, right?
.org.
.org. I'm sorry. AE911Truth.org is where you want to go for more information. Kamal, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate the time. Take care.
Thank you so much, Bill.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for sharing a part of your day with us. Hopefully, this has motivated you to look into this situation further, because, knowledge is power, and the truth even more powerful than knowledge, believe it or not. So thanks again for being with us. God bless you. May God bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you, and may you be surrounded in his peace. Take care.